Welcome, everybody. Thank you so much for joining me this evening. Welcome to Perfectionism and My Gifted Child. My name is Dr. Jo Tuitt, and it's my pleasure to be here with you tonight. So thank you so much for joining me to share just a little bit about my background. Sorry, let me let in a couple more people here. To share just a little bit about my background, I've worked in the field of gifted education and conducted research in the field for about 33 years. My educational background is a little bit varied with undergraduate degrees in both business administration and sociology. And I have a master's in educational administration, and then my doctorate's in educational leadership with a certification in high ability education. Lending context to my background are my kiddos. I have four kids who have and are kind of running that educational gamut, if you will. I have a child that requires special education services, another who's high achieving. I have a creative thinker and a gifted or high ability student. So they truly are running that educational gamut. While I do have an extensive background in working with high ability students, it's really important for me to note tonight that I am not an expert in perfectionism. Um, Tonight, though, I am going to be sharing with you information that I've gathered, observations, resources that I have kind of come across and utilized throughout the course of my career. So that's enough about me. I want to be very respectful of your time tonight. So let's go ahead and jump right into our topic. First, I want to just share with you just a quick view of the different resources that I'm primarily drawing from tonight. Like I said, in addition to my own experiences, you'll see on some of the slides I have made specific references to the sources I've used, especially when I've borrowed rather heavily from this particular piece of work. On this slide, I do want to kind of point out those top two resources, the parent guide from the Indiana Association for the Gifted, as well as a parent's guide to gifted children from Webb, Gore, and Menden DeVry. Those are two fantastic resources. So if you're looking to do a little bit deeper dive, not only into perfectionism, but into the field of gifted in general, I would highly recommend those two. And then finally, here are a few more of the sources that I have utilized for this presentation tonight. So what is perfectionism? So perfectionism is that feeling that a person has that anything short of perfect is unacceptable. This is often accompanied by unrealistic and sometimes rather fluid goals, and the belief that if perfection isn't achieved, it's a failure, and therefore it's a sign of a personal worthlessness. So let's begin to unpack that definition. First, we're going to take a look at what a perfectionist thinks. Then we're going to take a look at what a person with perfectionistic tendencies may feel. Then we'll look at characteristics, signs, and a few other things. I've got lots of information to share tonight. So first, what a person with perfectionistic tendencies thinks. And I'm going to go ahead and read through these and add just a little bit as we're going along. But first, they may think that everything is black and white, where most of us understand that there are shades of gray, and we may sit in those areas of gray. To a person with perfectionistic tendencies, that gray area may represent confused thinking. A person with perfectionistic tendencies may feel that they have to be the best at everything they do, not just one particular area, but literally everything that they do. They may believe that if they make a mistake, something is wrong with them. And it doesn't have to be like one of those monumental mistakes that we can sometimes make. This could be something very, very simple. Perhaps it's, uh, using the wrong apostrophe or misspelling a word. I mean, it's truly something very simple um, can make them feel that there's something wrong with them. They may have to do more than feel like they have to do more than like everyone else. And what I mean by that is they have to have that feeling that they have to stay ahead, that they have to win in everything. They may feel that every detail has to be perfect. Like I said, again, that kind of relates back to that feeling that they can't make any mistakes. And if they do make a mistake, they may feel that people will think they're stupid or they're not good enough or they're unlikable. Um, they may feel that tasks should be done correctly the first time, and that if it takes more than one time, then there's something wrong with them. Um, they may have that negative feeling that they can't do anything right, and that's related to not being able to reach the goals that they're setting for themselves. And we'll talk about that a little bit more in a bit. And then they may also feel that if they can't do it perfectly, what's the point in doing it? And this can lead to procrastination. It can also lead to, well, to them not even trying to do whatever that task is, because again, if it can't be perfect, what's the point in doing it? So people with perfectionistic tendencies tend to put a lot of pressure on themselves. And in many ways, their self-worth is tied to doing things perfectly. And if they fail, whether it's a true failure or a perceived failure based upon their definitions and goals of being perfect, they're going to be very hard on themselves. They see themselves as worthless, stupid, unlikable, unworthy, and so forth. Again, if they don't meet their definition of what perfect is. Let's dive just a little bit deeper and take a look at what a person with perfectionistic tendencies may feel. So, a person with these tendencies may spend a lot of their time fearful or anxious. They may not understand or even be able to verbalize where that fear or anxiety is coming from. They just know they feel it, they just know it exists. And they may tend to be deeply embarrassed about mistakes, afraid of appearing stupid or incompetent, afraid of being rejected, and even ashamed of having these different fears. So, as you might imagine, this is a very tough place to be. It's a tough place to live. We often wonder, as parents who are looking at perfectionism, whether it's inborn or if it's a learned behavior. As a parent of a student with perfectionistic tendencies, when I was first diving into and learning about this, that was one of my big questions. What did I do to cause this? And there are kind of two different ways of thinking on this. One way I have read about and studied is the belief that perfectionism is relational, meaning that someone, in addition to your child, is involved in creating that need or that drive for perfection. The other person's involvement can be real or it can be perceived by the child, and it's often fueled by that underlying fear that they won't be acceptable to that person if they don't do well, if they aren't constantly excelling, if they're not perfect. And the other thought process or thought path on that, according to Webb and et al. In 2007, is the reference I'm using for that, is that it's an inborn temperament. So this is often reinforced by the family environment, maybe parents that excel, not necessarily have perfectionistic tendencies, but who excel. That can be a reinforcement to that. But more often, it's the result of the child just setting very high standards for themselves. So again, those are kind of the two ways of thinking, whether perfectionism is inborn or learned behavior. So I'm not going to read all of these characteristics to you, but as I go through just a few of these, get kind of thinking, do you see yourself, or do you see your child, or do you see both of you in these? Um, a person with perfectionistic tendencies may tend to overcommit themselves. They may rarely delegate work to others. They may have a need to always be in control. They may be fiercely competitive. They may never be satisfied with their work. They may call themselves stupid when they do something imperfectly, and they may procrastinate. Again, I'm just highlighting a couple of these characteristics. But did you see yourself or your child in any of those? If so, you can drop me a note in the chat box there, either to me personally or to everyone in the chat box. Societally, we often hear perfectionism spoken about in terms of being a really good thing. So it's a characteristic that we should all want to possess. In other areas, it's seen as a challenge with potentially bad outcomes. So perfectionism is seen as both good and bad. I'd be interested in hearing your thoughts on this. So again, if you want to drop me a note in the chat box, either to me personally or to everyone. In what ways is perfectionism good, and in what ways is perfectionism bad? I'm going to give you just a second, and then I'll take a look at those messages. What good way is perfectionism good, and what ways is perfectionism bad? All right. Yeah, thanks. Thanks. Yeah, excellent. Yeah, so people with perfectionistic tendencies are often seen as putting out good work, um, striving for excellence, and then it can be seen as bad because it can hurt self-esteem, it can damage confidence, and can definitely take a toll on mental health. Yeah, thank you for participating with that. So with these characteristics here on the screen in mind, let's now consider the different signs that you may see displayed by a person with perfectionistic tendencies. So we're just going to go over each of these. You may notice an all or nothing type of thinking. This is where everything has to be absolutely perfect. There's no almost perfect because almost is, again, seen as a failure. So it's an all or nothing thinking pattern. You may notice a critical eye. Perfectionists are more critical of themselves and also more critical of others. And this is compared to high achievers without perfectionistic tendencies. So a high achiever without those tendencies takes pride in their accomplishments, and they tend to be supportive of other people. While high achievers with perfectionistic tendencies, they're those people that are often spotting mistakes and imperfections in their work and others' work, and pointing those out. You may notice kind of a push versus pull kind of concept as well. So this, again, comparing high achievers with perfectionistic tendencies and high achievers without those tendencies. You typically see the high achievers without the tendencies pulled toward their goals by simply the desire to achieve them. They're happy with the steps that they're making toward that goal, toward that direction. Whereas high achievers with perfectionistic tendencies, they tend to be pushed by a fear of anything less than a perfectly met goal. So the steps that they're taking to get there, they don't see those and recognize the value in those because they are literally being pushed by the fear of anything less than perfection. And then you might also notice unrealistic standards. And perfectionists, or people with perfectionistic tendencies, tend to set goals that may not be reasonable. They may tend to set them just super high, in comparison to high achievers without perfectionistic tendencies, who tend to set goals, and they set high goals, but they're reachable, and they tend to enjoy not only reaching that goal, but then pushing themselves to go just a little bit further. Whereas the persons with the perfectionistic tendencies, those initial goals are so far out of reach, it's going to be a struggle to get to them, let alone going a little bit further. And they don't experience the joy in that process. And then next, you may notice focusing on just the results. So again, by way of comparison, high achievers without perfectionistic tendencies tend to enjoy the process of chasing that goal as much as actually reaching it, which I kind of touched on before. Whereas those high achievers with the perfectionistic tendencies, they see that goal, they see nothing else. They're so concerned with reaching the goal and avoiding failure that they can't enjoy that process. And then finally, you may notice depression from unmet goals. So we're going to go just a little bit deeper into this depression piece, where high achievers without perfectionistic tendencies are typically able to bounce back pretty easily from disappointment. High achievers with perfectionistic tendencies tend to beat themselves up and kind of sit in that negative space with those negative feelings. And they may tend to struggle to just move on from that. Recipe and all in 2021 shared that in addition to having less happiness, high achievers with perfectionistic tendencies also tend to have higher levels of anxiety and lower levels of psychological well-being. So I want to talk just a moment about the fear of failure, procrastination, defensiveness, and low self-esteem. So fear of failure, high achievers with perfectionistic tendencies are afraid to fail because they may disappoint others. They may hurt their image. They Well, let's leave it there with disappointing others and hurting their feelings. There are so many different negative things that they attach to that. So anything less, though, than perfection, as is kind of a reoccurring theme, is seen as a failure. And then procrastination, it's kind of a vicious cycle because fear of failing tends to sometimes immobilize the high achiever with these tendencies. And so by being immobilized, they fail to do anything, they fail to act, which then kind of feeds back in to that fear of failure. So it's just kind of a very vicious cycle. And then defensiveness is talking here about being less than perfect for a high achiever with perfectionistic standards is actually painful. It's scary. High achievers see criticism, for example, as valuable information to help them improve and help them get better and help them progress. Whereas high achievers with perfectionistic tendencies, they tend to take constructive criticism very defensively, and um, it can damage self-esteem, their self-worth. And again, as I mentioned before, they can sit there in kind of that negative space with those negative feelings and really struggle to move past it, and struggle to utilize it in a positive sense. And then in terms of low self-esteem, high achievers um, tend to have, without perfectionistic tendencies, I should say, tend to have high self-esteem. Um, Perfectionists tend to be more self-critical and unhappy, which um, again lowers the self-esteem. They can be or feel lonely. They can feel isolated. You may even see a high achiever with perfectionistic tendencies pushing others away with that critical nature, finding the errors, finding the mistakes, finding the problems. And then those feelings then can lower their self esteem even more. So, again, it's a really vicious cycle. So we've kind of talked about what high achievers with perfectionistic tendencies may think, what they may feel. And so let's talk a little bit about the types of perfectionism. There are basically two types of perfectionism. There's adaptive and there's maladaptive. And as you can see on the graphic, these kind of sit on a continuum with adaptive perfectionism at one end and maladaptive perfectionism at another end. And we can find ourselves and our children at any point along there. And it's not necessarily a fixed point, it can be very fluid as well. So, adaptive perfectionism is associated with high personal standards in which the individual, the high achiever with perfectionistic standards, perfectionistic tendencies rather, can adapt, and they're flexible within those standards. So basically, adaptive perfectionists tend to not take themselves too seriously. That's not to say that they don't or won't struggle. Um, they certainly may with some of the things that we've talked about. They have just adjusted and or embody good coping strategies. A maladaptive perfectionism is where the high achiever with these tendencies tends to berate themselves or have intense self-deprecation when they don't meet their own standards. According to Wilkinson, maladaptive perfectionism has been consistently linked to depression, anxiety, and increased levels of stress. One of the key differences shared by the Intellect Company is in how a person views and handles failure. In adaptive perfectionism, it's seen as a learning opportunity, something to basically adapt to. In maladaptive perfectionism, it can lead to obsessive or avoidant behaviors, including procrastination. So to provide some basis of comparison between these two types of perfectionism, there was a study of 323 three participants. I think the study was by Wilkinson, but I may be misremembering at the moment. But anyway, 323 participants across a really wide range of cultural backgrounds. And that study found that maladaptive perfectionists suffer from significantly more stress than adaptive perfectionists, which we've kind of touched on. And when faced with failure, adaptive perfectionists tend to be disappointed, but they also tend to regroup or rebound quickly and move on. Whereas maladaptive perfectionists tend to be more self critical, they dwell on their lack of performance, and they can also dwell on the lack of what they consider standards of other people. So, again, that's adaptive and maladaptive perfectionism. So let's take a look at four of the most common myths about perfectionism, and then we'll talk about what to look for in your children, as well as some coping strategies and how you can help. The first myth that you see there on the screen is the myth that perfectionism got me to where I am today. It made me a success. How many of you heard that? Working in gifted education with students who have perfectionistic tendencies, I've definitely heard that one quite a few times. The reality is that perfectionism does not lead to success or fulfillment. Perfectionists fail to realize that their success was achieved despite their perfectionism, not because of their perfectionism or their perfectionistic tendencies, but despite those tendencies. Myth number two, perfectionists have an enormous desire to please others and be the best they can be. In reality, some people with perfectionistic tendencies often begin as an attempt to win love, acceptance, and approval, which we've already talked about. That's one way of thinking, that they're trying to win that love, that approval, that attention, that acceptance from somebody in their lives. For others, this seems to be more of an inborn temperament. The third myth is that perfectionists get things done and they do it right the first time, when in reality, perfectionists often struggle with procrastination. They may struggle with missed deadlines. They may struggle with low productivity. So very different there in the way that it's perceived as to the reality of it. And the final myth I want to mention is that perfectionists are determined to overcome all obstacles in order to be successful. And in reality, people with perfectionistic tendencies are especially vulnerable to serious difficulties such as depression, writer's block, performance anxiety, social anxiety. So, yeah, definitely different from the way that perfectionists are perceived. So let's dive into what perfectionism can look like for our children and teens. So what we've been talking about it applies to children and teens as well as adults. Now we're going to kind of narrow that funnel in just a little bit and look specifically at teens and adults. So I'm going to just go through this list here and add a little bit more information. So we can see this as a tendency to become highly anxious, angry, or upset about making mistakes. It may seem like a very small mistake to us as parents, but to our children, this may really be something huge, and it may play out. I'm embarrassed to say that with my child that has perfectionistic tendencies, a small mistake that she was just going on and on about, I felt like she was, being a bit dramatic about it. But to her, it really was as bad as what she was expressing to me that it was. It may present as chronic procrastination and difficulty completing tasks, those missed deadlines for homework assignments, or even not turning homework assignments in would be an example of that chronic procrastination. It may present as our children being easily frustrated, and we see them just kind of give up very easily, just quit and walk away, and or not even start. It may present as chronic fear of embarrassment and humiliation, which is so intense that they can't even try. They don't want to try. It can present as overly cautious and being extremely thorough in tasks. For example, they may spend 2 to 3 hours on a homework assignment that truly should only take about 20 minutes because they are really trying to perfect every nuance, every piece of that assignment. It may present as trying to improve things by writing and rewriting and rewriting, when the first time it was actually good and could be turned in, they may keep going back and back and back. Again, that relates very much to that cautiousness and thoroughness of tasks. It may present in frequent catastrophic reactions or meltdowns when things don't go perfectly or things don't go as they expected. May present as a refusal to try new things and risk making mistakes. It may present as declining participation in fun activities, and this is to avoid disappointments and failing to live up to unreasonably high expectations. And those expectations could be real, or they could just be perceived expectations. So these are just a few of the ways we might see perfectionistic tendencies displayed in our children and in our teenagers. So let's take a look at some coping strategies. I'm going to talk specifically about 4 different coping strategies that we can work on with our kiddos. In my resources that I shared at the beginning, I would highly recommend taking a look at the Wilkinson publication to get a little bit more detail about these 4 different coping strategies. But first, we have the task-oriented coping. This is a problem-focused strategy where the individual assumes that the situation can be changed. So it's helping our children adjust their mindset that situations can be changed. As Wilkinson says, it involves taking direct action to alter the situation itself to reduce the amount of stress experienced. And then there's emotion-oriented coping strategies. And I should preface these 4 strategies by saying that some of these are positive and some of them are perhaps not so positive. I apologize. I should have mentioned that before. These are the coping strategies that we may see in our children, not necessarily the coping strategies that we want to teach. However, that task-oriented one is actually very good. So emotion-oriented coping strategies, where we see our children tend to, or these strategies tend to be based in trying to reduce the negative emotions, typically through avoidance of the situation or by denial of the issue or the existence of the issue at all, or by giving up hope and assuming that the situation can't be fixed, it can't be rectified. So, just why try, why deal with it? I'm just going to absolutely avoid it. The next coping strategy that we can see is the strategy of distraction. And it's exactly like what it sounds. Feeling the situation can't be rectified, can't be fixed. So just avoiding it altogether by engaging in other issues, hence not confronting that actual problem. And then the final one that we might see is social diversion. And this is based on either seeking a diversion from the issue by turning to friends and family, or by trying to get others to assist and deal with that issue. So, going back to those two types of perfectionism, the adaptive and maladaptive, I'll kind of place these in some context there. Adaptive perfectionists tend to use the task oriented coping strategy as well as the social diversion coping strategy, whereas our maladaptive perfectionists tend to resort to the emotion oriented and the distraction or avoidance oriented coping strategies. So that was a lot of information to kind of give us a foundation of what we may see, to understand how they may feel. And now, as parents, we're always looking for how can we help our children, right? So I'm going to go through, I think maybe two slides of different ways that we can help our children. So the first way is to model mistakes. Our kids, especially when they're young, they think we're perfect. As they get to those teen years, they think we're anything but perfect, or maybe that's just my teens. But it's important to model our mistakes, help our kiddos see that there is that gray. Everything's not black and white. There is gray. And it's okay to sit in those areas of gray. It's okay for them to see us not knowing the answer, to not completing something perfectly or not completing something well, to fail at doing something. It's important for them to hear us acknowledging that nobody's perfect and that all we can do is to do our best, especially in our young children, seeing us model these behaviors and hearing us say these words really goes a long way with them, because, like I said, they think that we're perfect when they're younger. It can also be very helpful in the teen years. It just kind of has a different way of impacting and influencing them. Be aware. We need to be aware of our criticisms of others. They're they hear everything, don't they? So they hear and they own our criticisms of other people, when those criticisms may not even be focused on our kiddos or on anything even remotely related to our kiddos. They will see those criticisms, hear those criticisms, and own them, apply them to themselves. So it's just important that we're aware of those and how we're saying them and how we're applying them. Providing our students with examples of imperfection, examples of failure, using their role models from books and from movies, from athletics and so forth. I like to keep kind of a little, I call it my cheat sheet, of quotes and examples that I pull out and use, kind of pepper them into conversations all the time. So I'm not just whipping them out when I see something that may need addressed, but I've tried to build these into the culture, or sew them into the fabric of just kind of our regular lives at home. And so a few of those that I pulled from my little cheat sheet is, and a lot of, I know elementary schools like to use the story of Thomas Edison. So he failed 1,000 times before successfully making the light bulb. So that's an excellent one as we're working with our young people. Another one that a lot of coaches like to bring out is that Michael Jordan, incredible, phenomenal basketball player, he didn't make his high school basketball team the first time he tried out. So again, these are just two of those that you can kind of keep in your own personal cheat sheet to kind of weave into the conversations that you have with your kiddos at home. A couple of quotes that you can also weave in. I like one by Robert Kennedy, and I'm sorry, I'm going to have to take a moment to read this one. Only those who dare to fail greatly can ever achieve greatly. And then, of course, I do also really like the one from Henry Ford of whether you think you can or that you can't, you are usually right. So again, creating that cheat sheet and way to utilize those in just um, the fabric of our daily lives. And then create a safe environment for taking academic risks. I've read quite a few different things on the importance of praising attempts rather than outcomes. This was one that I had to work on in my own home because I was that mom that put the A+ papers up on the refrigerator, and I did see how that was starting to have an effect on my child with perfectionistic tendencies. And so I like to think I subtly, but it may not have been subtly, adjusted that and started putting those papers on the refrigerator that may not have the best grades on them, may not have that A+, but that I know they worked really hard on and would talk about the work that she put into it. And regardless of the grade, it deserved to hang on the refrigerator. And we can help them to understand the belief that abilities can be developed, that they're not fixed and unchangeable. That's also a big one with high achievers with perfectionistic tendencies. They think that their abilities are exactly where they are, and they're always going to be that way. So working with them to understand that these aren't fixed, that they are changeable, that they can actually have some fluidity to them. So again, focusing on improving rather than proving their abilities, improving rather than proving. Um, Helping our kiddos adhere to schedules that limit time spent on assignments is really important because they do have the tendency to spend much more time than is necessary or required for an assignment, uh, doing, redoing, writing, rewriting, and it's never going to meet the goals that they set for themselves. So, helping them to create timelines for the completion of their work. So, looking at an assignment, helping them to determine, well, okay, this looks like you need to spend X amount of time on it. So, let's break it down for those bigger assignments. We'll break it down to doing this much on this day, this much at this time, that sort of thing. And then kind of helping them to adhere to those time restraints. When you're starting out, the students, teachers can definitely be a huge help in helping you to know about how much time they should be spending on each of those assignments. So working closely with the teacher can definitely be helpful. But again, helping them to set time limits on assignments and sticking to those time limits. We can help our kiddos to learn to set priorities and kind of gain balance. Again, this is through helping them realize that not every single task that they do needs 100% of their energy. I actually have a husband who has perfectionistic tendencies, and he's in doc school right now. And he does believe that every assignment, every project requires about 110% of his energy. So, working with him too, trying to help him to grab onto that not everything needs 100%. Sometimes 80% is just fine. Sometimes 70% is okay too. Um, Helping our kiddos review their day and their priorities can also be a very helpful strategy. And with that, what I've seen to be successful is at the end of the day, talking with them about what their priorities were for that day and how those priorities made them feel. Were they mentally energizing or were they draining on them? And what impact then it had on them. And then looking the next day for what are your priorities for tomorrow. So just kind of investing a little bit of time in helping them to, um, I guess, debrief about their day, but also to really analytically think about their day and how, where they're putting their energies is making them feel and whether or not there's value added to that. So the goal here is to also help them understand that um, good enough can actually be okay. And the time that they're spending on taking care of those priorities doesn't need to be so um, overwhelming and time consuming that it doesn't leave time for other activities, hobbies, time with family, time with friends, all of those other things that are super important. We can help our children understand that their image isn't based solely on how perfectly they do on something, that they are made up of more than being perfect. They're made up of more than being the student that gets all A's or sets the curve or excels at everything. That they are made up of a lot more than that. So I'm helping them to um, get a better idea of their image and who they are, and also helping them to challenge that kind of all or nothing thinking by seeking compromises and avoiding words like always, never, all, should, must. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that in a few moments. So Webb et al., I see I've got a typo there on the screen. Sorry about that, from 2007 that I mentioned before, has a section in the book that is covering self-talk mistakes. And I want to share those with you because I think these are really important because our high achievers with perfectionistic tendencies can get stuck in that negative self-talk. And so one of the types of self-talk that they mention, they call it um, the bad bookkeeping error. And people with perfectionistic tendencies, excuse me, will sometimes focus on that one foolish or tiny mistake of their day. And they ignore then all of those good things that happened or all of the things that they achieved that day. Um, it's called the bad bookkeeping error because the person tends to just focus on that one bad debit and it cancels out all of the good credits toward their self-worth. And then there's the proportionality error. And this is where the negative self talk takes up the largest portion of their day. It could be 70, it could be 80, it could be 90% of the day, not allowing them to see any of the positive aspects. So most people don't even realize how much and how extensive their negative self talk is, but that negative self-talk is usually pretty easily noticed by family and friends. So you'll be able to see that pretty clearly. Illogical beliefs can create significant amounts of stress as these mindsets lead to the inappropriate should statements that can be evaluative, they can be judgmental, especially when they're comparing themselves with others. So, examples such as, I should feel worse than that, or I should think that, or everyone likes me, I should like everyone. Um, these are illogical and unreasonable beliefs. The shoulds should be replaced with things like it would be nice if, or other positive statements. So, in my example of everyone likes me, so I should like everyone, could be changed to everyone likes me. It would be nice if I liked everyone. So, again, adjusting those illogical beliefs. And then finally, failing to look for evidence. And it's evidence that would contradict a belief, such as I'm stupid, or I'm selfish, or I should have done better. These statements can cause guilt, as well as a whole slew of other feelings. And as parents, we can work on teaching our children to look for the evidence. Okay, you say you should have done better. Can you give me the evidence that you didn't do your best? Can you give me the evidence that you should have done better? Can you give me the evidence that you didn't put in enough time? Can you give me the evidence? You see where I'm going with that. Asking them to, by asking them to provide you the evidence, it's also teaching them to evaluate their feelings as it relates to whatever the behavior or outcome is. So, to kind of quickly sum up all of this information that we've taken in tonight, um, what we can do for our children, it would be helpful for us to convey courage, um, to acknowledge learning. It would be helpful for us to expect progress and not perfection, to applaud persistence. It would be helpful for us to honor time invested and to discover meaning and enjoyment. We all eventually fail at something. And when a high ability student with perfectionistic tendencies inevitably does, that something isn't perfect, or they don't understand a concept as quickly as they think they should, it can affect their self esteem. We can also see them quickly giving up on something if they can't make it perfect, or procrastinating, or simply not even starting. This can lead to that negative cycle of poor perseverance skills and, in turn, low self esteem. So, helping them to understand and own that life doesn't have to be perfect to be wonderful can be a challenge. Using these tips may aid each of us in helping our kiddos to navigate their world, and help them to understand and incorporate healthy coping strategies into their lives. Change is not going to happen overnight, but it is possible. So please keep in mind, I try to keep in mind, a beautiful thing is never perfect. I actually have this hanging uh, so that we can see that all the time. A beautiful thing is never perfect. If you have any questions, please feel free to drop those in the chat box if you're here in the Zoom room. And if you're watching this on one of our social media platforms, you can either drop your question in the comments, or you can email it to me at the address next to my name on your screen. I'm going to go ahead and stop recording now and answer those questions. So thank you so much for joining. Have a beautiful evening.